Order, order. Welcome everyone to today's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee session, this one-off session on the veterinary sector. This is a one-off session, but it fits in very well with many sort of parallel inquiries and threads that we have been looking at, from food security, the food supply chain, biosecurity, trade, mental health inquiry, and also land-based educational inquiry as well. We visited as a committee last week Harper Adams University and were privileged to go around the new Harper and Keele Veterinary School as well, and we were very impressed with what was going on there. My name is Neil Hudson. I'll be chairing today's session. I should first of all declare a very close personal and professional interest in this subject area, as I am a veterinary surgeon myself and a fellow of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. I would like to introduce our witnesses, and if we start with Professor Stuart Reid. If you first of all could say who you are, where you're from and what you represent, and that would be great. So Stuart.
Stuart Reid, I'm Principal and President of the Royal Veterinary College. I'm here principally representing the Royal Veterinary College, but I also chair the Veterinary Schools Council in the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Christine Middlemiss, please.
Thank you. So I'm Christine Middlemiss. I'm the UK Chief Veterinary Officer, an England Chief Veterinary Officer. So I represent all 4 administrations internationally. I'm also Head of Profession across government for veterinary surgeons that work in government.
Thank you very much. And Emily Miles, please.
Emily Miles, Chief Executive of the Food Standards Agency, which works in England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Malcolm Morley, please.
Malcolm Morley, Vice President of the British Veterinary Association. We represent nearly 20,000 vets across all sectors.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving up your time to be with us today. We've got quite a wide-ranging session. It was started as looking at veterinary shortages, but we're going to be looking at a lot of issues facing the veterinary sector. So we have a lot to cover, and what I would ask our 4 witnesses, if you agree with the rest of the panel, then say that, so we don't necessarily have to have duplicate answers, and then we can get through a lot. The first question has actually changed slightly because today we had the publication from the Competition and Markets Authority of their initial review into veterinary services, and I know Malcolm's probably been doing the media round all day on this. So they've published their initial findings, and they've recommended that they're going to do a more formal market investigation moving forward, so they're going to consult on that and do a deeper review from there. So there are some take-home messages that they have put forward, but I just wanted to first of all ask the panel what your thoughts are in terms of the developments today. We will be delving into some of the issues in some of the lines of questions, so initially just some brief remarks as to what you think about the CMA findings today, and if I could kick off with Malcolm, please.
I think in any sector, external review has to be welcomed. We often have a different perspective. They've seen a spectacular number of not only animal owners but vets respond to this. We recognise that there are elements of all of the bullet points that they've raised that need to be addressed. I think that the key point for this House is the last bullet point, which says the regulatory framework is outdated and may no longer be fit for purpose.
Okay, we will explore that in terms of updating and renewing legislation moving forward. Emily, do you have any comments on it at all?
So the Food Standards Agency relies on, we outsource our provision of vets. We spend over £50 million a year on vets with a private provider, and we're just going to retender that in the next year. So we're very interested in there being a healthy market for vet services, and absolutely support the point about Veterinary Surgeons Act and the legislative situation.
Okay, thank you. Christine.
So I recognise both as a user of veterinary services, a member of the profession and Chief Veterinary Officer, much of what the CMA has commented on. I think further exploration is valid, and I too absolutely support revision and update to the Veterinary Surgeons Act to consider regulation of practices, but also to make it contemporary legislation for our profession.
Thank you very much. And Stuart?
This is going to be easy, I agree.
Great, thank you. That's great. Yeah. So this was set up initially to be looking at the veterinary shortages angle, and actually I've got a quote from the CMA Chief Executive, Sarah Cardell, speaking about the review, and she said, "We have heard concerns from those working in the sector about the pressures they face, including acute staff shortages, and the impact this has on individual professionals." So these will be some of the issues we may be able to explore as we go through this session. If I can start with Christine now. In 2018, you told the former iteration of the EFRA committee that the workforce shortage in the veterinary profession was about 11%. Do you have a feel for what the size of that shortage is now, both in percentage and real terms, and how has that changed in any direction in the last 6 years?
Don't have a huge greater handle on it. I don't think it's got less, reduced from 11%, and probably has got a bit greater because of events that have happened, both the increased require for vet roles in certification post-Brexit. We've had increased disease outbreaks, and I know we in government have been calling on private vets more. And then we've had pandemic puppies and a huge number of other things that colleagues have been busy with, on top of what was already quite a pressurised system. It's interesting to look back at how many vets have been registered since the last Veterinary Surgeons Act in 1966. We had about 8,000 vets in the register. When there was the last EFRA committee inquiry, as I understand, 2007 into the Veterinary Surgeons Act, we had about 22,000. We now have about 30,000 vets, but the profile of the profession and how we work and what we're required to do has changed. So those are people available to work or on the register, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have that many full-time vets working.
How do we get a feel for exactly how many vets we do need in this country? I mean, this has been looked at over many, many years when, decades ago they said, we're going to be thinking about reducing the number of vet schools, when actually they found out we weren't training enough vets. And now we've had, in the last few years, new vet schools, well-needed and much-needed vet schools coming online. How do we know, as a country, how many vets we need, both for companion animals, cats and dogs, but also the farm animal sector, public health, research? How do we know?
It's really difficult because, as I said, things arrive that you're not expecting. So you have your standing workforce carrying out routine business as usual, but as we saw with, for example, pets coming from Ukraine, increased work, as I said, pandemic puppies. Looking forward and trying to scenario plan for eventualities is really, really hard. And of course, it's 5 years at least to go through vet school. Trying to match all that up is really, really difficult, and a workforce plan would be to look at that.
We're going to come on to that on the next question from Kat. So if we can just come back to, so I think we're probably all agreed we haven't got enough vets and we do have a shortage. So if I can turn to the rest of the panel then, what is your experience then of the shortage of vets, and how is it affecting your particular lines, whether it's within vet schools in terms of training, but also provision? In a vet school you have provision of clinical services as well, and Malcolm, you represent the veterinary profession, and Emily in terms of food hygiene and public health. In your experience, how are the shortages affecting your lines of the profession then? Stuart, do you want to?
Well, certainly recruiting specialists is a very different part of that market, and we may get on to talking about that in detail. But in terms of the generalities, if I could just maybe draw some parallels with what's happening in the United States, where I think probably their grip on their understanding of the workforce in general is perhaps a little bit better developed. So US Bureau of Labour Statistics is suggesting that the veterinary job market is going to grow by 19% by 2031. And the prediction there is that there are going to be between 15 and 18,000 jobs unfilled, veterinarian shortage in that time. Adding to that, and I think we can't do this without talking about veterinary nurses and veterinary techs, but in that setting they're talking about a 30-year horizon on fixing the shortfall if resourcing of the training of veterinary technicians and veterinary nurses doesn't improve. So I think the closest parallel market we can see would be looking at North America. So we certainly have a shortage, but I think they've maybe defined what their shortage is a little better.
Thank you. And Emily, in terms of the FSA view, in terms of how are the shortages affecting you?
So There was a point in 2021, so just after Brexit, when we had to alert abattoirs to the fact that we might not be able to cover every single shift with a vet, because we were concerned at the time about a shortage of official vets from our service delivery partner. Our service delivery partner has actually rectified that situation. We didn't have to prioritise particular abattoirs or particular shifts in the end, but that's always the risk that I feel I'm sitting on. And when you've got, in effect, an £8 billion meat industry, £2 billion of exports, all of that relies on a vet signing off the animal welfare and the animal health in an abattoir. That's what we're playing with. Of our 200, in abattoirs across the country, there are maybe 270 abattoirs. We have 268 vets. 99% of them are from overseas. So just 3 are from trained in the UK, so 99% are from overseas. We have, in the last year, attrition from that cohort has been at 33%, which has gone up in previous years. So in 2022, it was at 22%. We're doing a huge amount to attract more UK-trained vets into that profession. I can say more about that later.
We'll explore that.
But in effect, there is clearly a shortage and we're struggling to retain vets.
We're going to get on to retention as well. So to Malcolm, if I can ask you to address that, but also if you could also follow up with how do the workforce pressures and shortages vary between the different sectors of the veterinary profession that the BVA represents, whether that's large animal, small animal, or whatever. How is it impacting your members?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because whatever this shortage, it's not equally distributed. And the likelihood, although we don't have specific data on it, is that if you want to employ a small animal vet in an urban area in the southeast, you're going to find that much easier than if you're trying to employ a vet in a remote and rural part of the UK. Particularly in OV work, that's another area where we've heard there are particular challenges around this workforce.
OV being official veterinarian.
Exactly, working in slaughterhouses and supporting public health as well as animal health and welfare. We've seen a real shift in the demographic of our profession, because pre-Brexit and the pandemic in 2018, we recruited more new vets from the EU, over 1,100, than we trained vets in the UK. In 2021, that 1,100 was reduced down to just over 300. So that's had a really significant impact, not only on vets not staying here, but not coming in. And whilst they can still come and work in the UK, there's a lot of friction to that.
Okay. We're going to explore that a bit more in terms of overseas vets and registration from there. If I can move on to the next question now to Kat Smith, please.
Thank you, Neil. So just looking to the issue of supply of domestically trained vets, and maybe I can start with you, Christine. How many new vets qualify annually in the UK at the moment, and how much does the training capacity need to increase to meet the workforce demands? Have you got any kind of numbers you're able to give the committee on that?
I think my colleague Professor Reid, leader of Vet Schools Council, will have those figures more detailed than I have them.
Can I, before you answer that, Stuart, could you explain to the public and to the committee a bit more about the Vet Schools Council and what that is?
It's the body that represents the UK veterinary schools. We have no regulatory authority. We work together to provide the very best we can in veterinary medical education.
Thank you.
So if we talk about enrolments, which is probably the most salient issue for this committee, given that we're looking at the future, in 23-24, the number that enrolled in total in this country is about 1766. That includes the 2 new schools. That's the Aberystwyth School that feeds into the Royal Veterinary College, and the new school in the University of Central Lancaster. So it's 1766. Now, I don't have the figure that says what that shortfall is, but you can add your 19 or 11% or whatever we decide is the case to show the shortfall. That's total enrolments. And those total enrolments are up 4% on the position 4 years ago. Total enrolments. Now, the composition of those enrolments in terms of, we're going to come on to, I understand, the home students and other, which I'll just refer to as other when I'm talking about anything other than a home student in due course. But that number has been increasing slowly, but not dramatically.
Are you able to say anything at all, Professor Reid, about there's obviously a shortage and we need to increase the number of enrolments. There's obviously then a need to increase the number of people able to educate and to train. How would one go about increasing the training capacity in that network, and would that be a particular challenge?
If I had the answer to that one, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. So, the reality is most of us are working at capacity. The specialist facilities that are required, the teaching facilities, and of course the staff-student ratios are important considerations on all of those. In this country, we've seen 2 new schools open recently. We've got a third one in SRUC in Scotland. In North America, there are 10 new schools there or thereabouts opening at the moment. What we've got to recognise, though, is that pulling that lever of increasing capacity is at least a 5-year horizon from the day they open, and actually the planning would probably be 2 years before that. So there's a long way to go before we actually start filling that deficit.
You saying about the increase in North America. To what extent is the shortage that we have here a domestic issue, and how much of this is reflected in similar economies overseas?
I think where the veterinary profession is similar, it's pretty much the same. North America here, Australasia, and increasingly in Europe. I look to colleagues.
I agree. Would anyone disagree on the panel that want to offer a different perspective? I'm conscious that I don't. Okay. And then I suppose, should the government be collecting more workforce data? Because it strikes me that we're a little bit hazy on the details here. Should we be collecting more data for the veterinary profession? And how could collecting better data improve efforts to tackle the shortages that we have? Whoever wants to take it. Christine.
I think I agree. We could have better data, and we have been working on that with RCVS and BVA through various different surveys and things. No one organisation owns all the data. That's part of the problem. And when you lose people from the profession, you in effect lose that data as well. So the Royal College is developing more understanding of the workforce, and we share that. But yes, it could be a lot better. So,
who would be the obvious lead organisation to collect data on the veterinary? Malcolm.
I think it's worth pointing out the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons is undertaking a workforce modelling piece of work at the moment, and although different organisations hold data about it, we're feeding into that. This is a very collaborative piece of work that we're keen to support.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to the chair because I think Stephen's got some questions to follow on from that.
Yeah, thank you. So we've started looking at some of the recruitment and training. We're going to be exploring training a bit further, but we wanted to get on to the retention of vets and team vet, and Stephen's going to...
Thanks, Chair.
Along those lines.
So obviously we've heard challenges everywhere, competition for these expert services that we need in the United Kingdom. So how successfully are we retaining domestically trained vets in the workforce? To Christine and Malcolm.
So we could be better. We
better?
have 45% of our leavers of the profession have been in it for 4 years or less. And that includes 21% with less than 1 year experience. So we have relatively a high dropout rate, basically.
Yeah. Malcolm, to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some pretty tough statistics here. BVA undertakes a survey called Voice of the Veterinary Profession. In 2021, we asked vets how they rate working in the veterinary profession on the following aspects. It's quite telling because many of the things that are inherent in being a vet, they actually rated them really highly. Their interest, working with colleagues. But at the very bottom of it, we asked them, how would you rate workplace stress on a scale of excellent to terrible? And exactly 2/3, when questioned, said their workplace stress was either not very good or terrible. And exactly 1/4 said that their workplace stress was terrible. That is a pretty striking statistic. I think some of that is inherent to being a vet, and I enjoy being a vet, but it is a challenging place, working in that triad of vet, owner, and patient. BVA is really looking hard at this. We have got a big initiative under the umbrella of Good Veterinary Workplaces, trying to find all the solutions to that, championing things like flexible working, which really keeps people in the profession. We talk about making the work fit the workforce, not trying to shoehorn the workforce into the work. And indeed, we have an upcoming workplace accreditation scheme called Great Workplaces. So I think we really have to take notice of that figure. And this is not something that any one organisation is going to be finding the solutions to. Ourselves, Royal College of Veterinary surgeons, thinking about how new Veterinary Surgeons Act can support this. It's absolutely vital.
Yeah, please do.
I think we should note it becomes self-fulfilling. The stress, the poor work-life balance, which from the 2019 Royal College survey was the top reason people gave for dropping out, because if you have a shortage of vets, not everywhere, you have more pets, we have disease outbreaks, but we're obliged to provide the service.
Yeah. It's long established, the stress levels within farming and agriculture, so thanks for laying that out for us today. I think that the panel will be glad to hear that, worrying as it is. But is there any other key drivers that are causing vets to leave the profession, other than being overworked, stretched, underpaid, and often kind of marginalised, left alone, if you like?
I think we should recognise the demographics of the profession have changed. There is a lot more women, inevitably. Some are going to potentially not be in work, either, or work part, not being full-time, should we say, if they have children and things. But also recognising male colleagues' paternity leave and things. So the demographics changing of the profession, which is a good thing, but inevitably, if there's a certain amount of work to be done and you need staff to do it, contributes to that.
I'm thinking about this as a slice of the profession, so the public health bit rather than the overall profession question. So obviously there may be some vets who leave the public health work to go into other parts of the profession, but what we find is that people leave because of pay, because they want to progress elsewhere, so they can get increased pay or role design elsewhere. And then also with our foreign national vets who've trained abroad, the ones who've left, so I said there was a 33% turnover in the last year, so that our service delivery partner does exit interviews with them. A third of them left because they weren't able to achieve the English level that the Royal College sets of level 7. They went off and redid their exams, they had to go back home, get another visa, come back in, and 3 or 4 of them came back in. But that's the top reason. 14% went to a new job, 11% just wanted to go home, 6% had health reasons. So there's a range of reasons. So the English language piece is quite important, and perhaps we can come back to that later. The pay issue in the public sector is much more constrained. So, for example, we can match the starting salary of a vet in the private sector with the public sector when they graduate. But actually, to do a public health vet role, there were 2 British-trained vets who started a couple of years ago with our service delivery partner. They weren't able to keep up with the graduate development programme that the RCVS requires of them if they want to operate in clinical practice in those first couple of years. So they left after a couple of months. It was just too much work to do. And so what they're wanting to do is come into public health later, when actually we can't match the sort of salary that you might get 5 years into the profession in the private sector. The private sector might pay 60 grand at that point. We would be if we're paying 50 grand at that point, we're doing well. It might be more like 40. So, and that's constrained by the public purse, by pay rules, and also by how much money the FSA can spend with its service delivery partner.
I was speaking to FSS yesterday, and they told us that they had managed to recruit 1 vet recently, and it was at trainee level. So currently it's a very challenging situation, but it's got the potential to reach critical levels. So with that in mind, what steps could the government and the veterinary profession itself take to increase job satisfaction, to increase well-being, and obviously keep retention within the sector? So that goes to Malcolm or Emily.
Perhaps if I could take that first. So I think there are things that can be done within the role design in the public health space. So, for example, what we're trying to do, our service delivery partner is doing this, is not just have you in an abattoir 5 days a week. If you're in 2 or 3 days a week, or if we can have different, more flexible contracts, so you're working term time and not holidays, that we might more part-time work, that's more possible in our sector than perhaps it might be in the private sector. So there's a role design piece. I think there are then some other things that would make a huge difference. So there's a financial investment piece needed in terms of pay. We will be taking a submission to the Treasury about vet pay in the next spending review. if we're going to increase the pay of vets, it falls either to the taxpayer or to the industry. We have to charge, at the moment we charge out about 70% of the cost of the official controls, but that might be, that would be something that I think would make a difference too. But you're not going to solve the public health veterinary issue without solving the broader veterinary numbers in the round, and I think this needs a long-term approach.
One thing I hope we're going to be talking about a lot today is the veterinary team, not just about vets. And one of the things that really constrains us at the moment is that we don't have the veterinary team to support us in the way that we could, particularly in remote and rural practice. Currently, we need veterinary technicians who can work alongside vets in the farm animal sector. That's not possible under the current Veterinary Surgeons Act without secondary legislation or a new Veterinary Surgeons Act. We need to be championing the role of veterinary nurses. This is a profession who is saying that one of the reasons why we need a new Veterinary Surgeons Act is to champion the role of those allied professionals. And I think that is a really striking thing when you look at human healthcare and how much of that is being delivered by colleagues. We are a long way behind.
Can I illustrate that with a couple of examples? So in an abattoir, the vet works very closely with meat hygiene inspectors. And the meat hygiene inspector is an allied professional, and their role is set out in the official control regulations, but they could do a broader range of things. And if the Veterinary Surgeons Act was reformed to describe the vet in a different way, that would enable the meat hygiene inspector to pick up more animal health welfare issues. Same at port. So you have environmental health officers at port. The vet is overseeing checks and so on. Again, they could have a much better team working together there.
Seems like quick fixes that could have a good impact as well. Thank you. Chair, I'm finished.
Thank you. Or Stuart, did you want to come in on that?
I'd just emphasise something that Emily said there. We're not going to sort one bit of the profession unless we sort it generally. Yeah. I mean, I can't emphasise that enough. And I mean, from where I'm sitting, I think the difficulty is that there are aspects of the profession and employment where I don't think any 18 or 21-year-old comes in with that as their career destination in mind. And so the more attractive, the more lucrative are always going to get first dibs when it comes to employment of employees. And we simply have to sort the bigger problem rather than a specific area. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Selene, I think you wanted to come in.
I just had a quick follow-up question. I've had the pleasure of spending more time with vets in the last couple of weeks than I normally do, and anecdotally have picked up, talking to some of your female vets, some of the issues around maternity cover and childcare arrangements. And I wonder if that was anything that you'd picked up in the data, or whether there were sort of steps to ensure that young women, young mums are able to continue in practice.
So as far as the British Veterinary Association is concerned, we're championing two elements of that. One is flexible working, and the other is return to work, encouraging workplaces to consider how they can bring people back into the workplace. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the number one reason for, the top four reasons for flexible working, caring, whether that is for children, elderly relatives or animals, because many vets have animals, is actually number 3. And just things to balance that workplace stress, so trying to find a work-life balance is pretty high on the list as well. But you raise a really important question. The challenge is that it's also reducing our full-time equivalent workforce.
Can I add another thing? So we just ran a extramural studies programme for some vet undergraduates. So we had about 9 of them come to the FSA for a week. All of them were women.
Explain to the public what extramural studies means.
It's
to
like
the
work experience.
Yeah, but it's a formal requirement that vet students have to do during their degree. Is that, Ms. Stuart, did you want to?
Perfect, yeah.
Thank you. So we had these 9 women come, and they were astonished to discover that in the public health world, so some of the roles that we have, like auditors who are directly employed by the FSA, they could work part-time, they could work remotely potentially, and that became an attractive thing as they were thinking about their career. I mean, I'd hope there would be male vets who would also be attracted by that, because obviously we want men to be doing childcare too. The other thing I would say that comes up anecdotally for us is about the workplace culture in slaughterhouses and in cutting plants. It's not, I mean, we have this with female meat hygiene inspectors as well. It can be a very male environment. It can feel a little bit old-fashioned. And actually we have plenty of female official vets, but there can be friction issues, and that's not an attractive thing. So there's something about making the culture of the places where they work, the slaughterhouses, the cutting plants as well, being appropriate for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Slane. I just wanted, while we're on this subject of retention, just to explore a bit further some of the stresses and strains on Team Vet as well. We took very powerful evidence in our mental health inquiry from James Russell from the BVA and also Rosie Allister, who's done a lot of work in terms of researching mental health issues in the profession, but also down into the student body as well. And vets, sadly, as we know, are higher incidence of mental ill health and also, sadly, thoughts and suicide itself. And so some of the pressures that people face in the front line, if you could just articulate to the inquiry some of those pressures. I mean, we've picked up in some of our inquiries, actually, Christine, you mentioned in the pandemic, so many people took on puppies and pets, and it put a lot of pressure on the veterinary sector. And I think I'm right in saying that the BSAVA, so the small animal arm of the profession, reported that the majority of their survey respondents said that they had received some form of abuse from their clients in that sort of couple of year period. And so I don't know whether, Malcolm, could you articulate to us some of the pressures that vets are facing in the front line, whether that's with disease outbreaks or upset clients? And the CMA findings as well about pricings, I'm sure, has not been without stress for the veterinary profession when the public is now saying, oh, you vets, you're charging us too much money, when that perhaps is not exactly the case in all instances.
Yes, we have to remember that this CMA review is about veterinary practices, not the people who are working them, who are often really motivated by delivering high level of animal welfare. And BVA surveys looking at abuse of vets, as I'm afraid I don't have the figures off the top of my head, both online abuse and in-person abuse, there's a significant level. The main professional indemnity insurer of the veterinary profession has seen their need for it to provide advice calls to vets going up year on year as the number of complaints goes up. I think these are societal issues which are wider than just the veterinary profession. So I think our role is trying to provide those workplaces which can keep and retain people whilst working in a stressful environment that we just have to recognise.
And the profession itself is trying to mitigate and offer support. So the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons has the Mind Matters initiative, and there is the Vet Life charity that provides support to Team Vet as well. Is that something that we need to get more of that to support everyone in the veterinary sector?
I think Desmond Tutu said something about, if we don't have to keep pulling people out of the river, we have to go upstream and look at why they're falling in. And it's great that we have Vet Life, who are there, a charity who support vets with mental health and other problems, but trying to go upstream and try to support people. And as far as we're concerned, one of the main things is trying to change the culture of veterinary practices to be supportive.
If we go upstream, Stuart, up into veterinary education, could you articulate to us what vet schools are doing to try and help their student bodies through, to give them coping and resilience strategies moving forward? What's the role of the veterinary education sector here?
I think it takes an entire village to raise a child, and I think that's really the way we think about how we support our students. So they're often out in the professional environments, it's what they see, it's what they experience. And we do know that part of the problem that we have is ensuring that they are in a supportive environment, whether they're within the universities, where there's very well-established advice and support systems, but also when they go out into the professional community and what they see and what they experience, not just in the professional extramural studies, but in the preclinical or animal husbandry exposure to farming environment, other industries where it is a different world as well. So it's ensuring that we've got the right levers in place to effect good quality, regulation is the wrong word, but quality control, and make sure that we are providing them with a safe environment. And that's not easy when, I say, we have no direct levers to pull in those two particular environments.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I just want to note that working within government as a vet is not without pressure either. When you look at colleagues in the field who have had 3 avian influenza outbreaks, winter after winter, blue tongue now, it's the same people responding in the same areas ongoing. Again, the Association of Government Vets undertook a survey a couple of years ago asking people about their well-being and so on. And that being on the front line, being the person who says, we have to cull not just that animal, but all of your animals, is a really stressful place to be in. We are much better at supporting them than we were in 2001. But it doesn't take away, there will be inevitably some people in that situation, and we have to equip them to deal with those really difficult conversations.
And I think
that's also in the acute disease outbreaks as well, but also in the sort of intermittent testing. We took evidence from James Russell about TB testing, the stresses on the vets and the farmers in that situation while you're all waiting for the results, and if you have a reactor and that's something you recognise,
And the same thing in slaughterhouses as well. So if you're, as the vet, you're overseeing the slaughter and you think that a certificate of competence for the slaughterman needs to be withdrawn, that can have a material effect on the business. If you're saying that the approval of the premises isn't safe because of food hygiene concerns, that can be detrimental to the business as well. So inevitably you end up in conflict with the business who's very concerned about their own livelihood. And that's what we ask of our vets. We don't pay them loads to do it. We ask them to protect animal welfare and public health in that way, and that's the tension we need to put in the system for them to take that regulatory role, but it causes stress. I do think, and I'm sure MPs here will have had letters from abattoirs complaining about vet action, as I do as well. I think it's a small proportion where you can have those very tense relationships on the ground. Actually, we mostly have very collaborative relationships with parts of the meat industry. I do think it gets improved with that role variety point I made. So if someone is able to be doing a number of different tasks across the veterinary public health piece and not doing the same thing every day, I think that helps. And then the more experienced vets find it easier. So if we can retain them, if they can be in those roles for 5 years, 10 years, it will get better. So some of the things we're talking about systemically will help.
I think these are points Mel made, that the stresses and strains are all arms of the profession in frontline clinical practice, in education, in extramural placements, but also, as you say, in the abattoir network, in terms of the pressures on the vets to actually call the food as being safe to be eaten. But then it was in 2001, it was a very brave vet that called it in an abattoir in Essex to say that this is foot and mouth, a disease we'd not seen for decades, to make that brave decision to call it. That's a very stressful thing to do. And so I think we shouldn't underestimate the pressures on professionals in the front line. Okay, I'm going to move now on to overseas vets. I'll move to Rosie, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is mostly this bit to Christine and Malcolm. How many vets are joining the UK workforce from overseas each year, and how's this changed since 2018? Malcolm's already mentioned the huge difference in numbers pre-Brexit and post-Brexit. I just wonder if they're kind of joined together. Christine, do you want to?
I don't have the figures in front of me. I can come back with the actual numbers of overseas vets joining, but prior to 2018, it was running about 25% of our Royal College registrations were from overseas. 25% were from the EU, 10% from the rest of the world. So it has been a significant number.
Thank you. Malcolm.
Yeah, when we think about overseas vets, we need to break this down into vets who are coming from with mutually recognised qualifications into the UK, what those qualifications are now, what they will be in the future, and also think about vets who are coming from other countries where we don't recognise their qualifications, and think about what the barriers to them might be. So there's some quite complex issues to delve into here.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of go on to that, hopefully. What steps could the government take to increase the attractiveness and accessibility of practising in the UK to foreign veterinary professionals, e.g. paying conditions, direct accreditation of EU vet schools, UK-EU veterinary agreement and things like that? Malcolm, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so, and coming back to my breakdown of it, if we think about vets from the EU with mutually recognised qualifications, it may seem easy, but previously they could come to the UK and then they could start looking for a job. They now have to look for a job from outside the UK, they have to apply for a visa, they have to meet the salary threshold, they have to meet a language examination, and we know from human behaviour that if you put friction and barriers in the way of things, people don't do it. And so I think it's all very well for us to say people can still do this, yes, but we've put a lot of friction in the way. I think in terms of vets coming from overseas without mutually recognised qualifications, they have to sit rightly the statutory membership exam at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and that is key to maintaining our standards. But at the same time, we have to recognise that at the moment that exam is only once a year. It is something that you have to pass the whole thing, so that if you fail the module in small animals, you have to then do the entire examination the next year without resitting part of it. And the RCVS have already proposed a statutory instrument to modernise that statutory membership exam for overseas vets. I think that could make a really big difference. At the moment, we're very grateful for the fact that refugee and asylum seeker vets, of whom there are a surprising number, can sit that examination free of charge. It is otherwise a charge of £2,500, and there are no past papers and no fixed syllabus. So this is a massive barrier.
Thank you. Emily, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you. If you compare pre-Brexit, before you exit, vets from EU member states didn't require a working visa, didn't have to meet specific language requirements, and benefited from automatic mutual recognition of their professional qualification. So now, as Malcolm said, they have to fulfil working visa arrangements, and that means as well, if they we are very fortunate to benefit from an arrangement which the Royal College have done for temporary registration, which is a temporary thing where vets who haven't met their level 7 English language requirements, so they tend to have level 6 instead, can practice for a temporary period. If they fail their level 7 language exam after 18 months, which is the deadline by which RCVS say they need to have got through that, they immediately lose their visa and they have to leave the country, and then they have to retake the exam and apply again for a visa in order to come back in. So it's quite high jeopardy. And just to add to this, whilst they're here, they need to learn to get their driving license, because they'll need to drive. So they get a temporary stay on they can have their international driving license, but they have 18 months to sort out their own domestic driving arrangements. And if they haven't come from an accredited vet school, they have to pass this statutory exam. So there's just a lot of, it's not just what the government does around the migrant salary point, it's also the RCVS arrangements that act as a barrier. I mean, what would make a big difference for us? We are keen to wean ourselves off this temporary registration piece if we can. The Royal College have given us to the end of this year to do that. And we've actually reduced the number of official vets who are here as temporary registrants from about 40% down to about 19%. So we're trying to come down from that. The issue that we've got is that we've got a pipeline of foreign-trained vets who we're now bringing in as meat hygiene inspectors to work for a couple of years so they can improve their English language requirement. That sounded like a really fantastic plan until the government put in their salary requirement for a visa. So because of that, the meat hygiene inspectors tend to get paid about 29,000 quid a year on average. The migrant salary cap is at 38,000. So we're suddenly in a position where we're going to be saying to the Royal College, either we're going to have to pay a huge amount addition for meat hygiene inspectors for this vet track, we call it, for people who are here, or you're going to need to change your language requirement, or we're going to need to have temporary registration for longer, none of which is a very appealing arrangement. So we're feeling a bit stuck with that at the moment and are trying to find a way through. That if we do end up paying for more for those meat hygiene inspectors who are coming on that vet track, who are trained vets from overseas but not yet Royal College accredited, it will be millions of pounds more, which again is paid for by the taxpayer or by the meat industry in charging.
Oh gosh, okay, thank you. This is a question for anyone that wants to jump in, but what assessment have you made of the potential impact of introducing the immigration salary list in April 2024 on the recruitment of vets from overseas?
I mean, I can just expand a little bit more. So for vets themselves, who tend to be paid above 38,000, it should be okay. It's the pipeline of vets that we've been relying on, which is the thing that feels in jeopardy. So that's and what I would like, if possible, is for an exemption for meat hygiene inspectors from that salary cap. I think that would be the simplest way of solving the issue. If not, the financial consequences are in the millions if we push the meat hygiene inspector salary up. Unless RCVS change their requirements about what a qualifying vet can be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Because the RCVS only just voted in, didn't they, to stop the... Yeah.
So, and they were incredibly generous to us because we found ourselves in a very difficult position in 2021, and at very short notice they created this temporary registration scheme, which we relied on enormously in 2022. We had, as I said, 45% or so of our vets relying on it. Last year they said, look, this is meant to be a temporary scheme, you need to come off it. So we've spent the last 6 months trying to get this pipeline in place, and actually we were having some good success. We're down to 19%, so we felt like we were making some progress. And we're also finding that if we bring in the vets with level 6 English rather than level 5 English, they're standing more of a chance of getting the level 7 when they come to it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in? Malcolm?
I think that,
Okay.
yeah.
I want to pick up the pipeline point. It's a pipeline for the whole of the profession, not just for vets working in food safety. So many vets will come in as meat inspectors or as vets working in FSA. They may move on to the Animal Plant Health Agency. We have hugely benefited from there. And they may move on to practice. So it's a pipeline for the whole of the profession.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, and I need to say that this would not be ubiquitous, but there's an issue around interns and residents for training and specialist aspects of the profession who are not necessarily paid at the level that's now being suggested. I know there are different models in different schools, and I can't speak for other schools other than myself, but ours are registered as students, which is a way around that. That's not true. They're also qualifying for a degree. But I know that some schools will find it difficult to get residents and interns in on the current recommendations. Just on a previous point, I knew I had it somewhere, but the figures you were asking about registrants from different parts of the world. So in 2018, there were somewhere like 1,100 from the EU, about 950 or so from the UK, and 250 from the rest of the world. And I don't have it bang up to date, but in 2022, it was 1,200 from the UK, 500, so over half, less than half of the EU previous figure, and 250 from the rest of the world, so it was remaining fairly constant. Okay.
Thank you. Malcolm, did you want to jump in?
I want to pick up another very important theme that I think we need to be exploring today. One is looking after the people that we have now, and the other is thinking about what the profession is in the future. And if I could summarise that by one word, it's diversity. If you have a monoculture of people, it's not as sustainable. And by bringing some of these vets in from overseas, we bring diversity, different ways of thinking, and I think that's of huge value to our profession.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Stuart, did you want to jump in?
No, that's fine with that.
Can I just come back in on the sort of the accreditation and the mutual recognition? Again, I declare an interest. I was trained up to be a visitor to vet schools in terms of Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and Stuart will be very familiar with this in terms of vet schools being visited by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, the European accrediting authorities and the American accrediting authorities, if those vet schools are accredited by them. It is a global profession, and that accreditation and mutual recognition process is kind of being unpicked now. So what does that mean for the vet schools and our supply for people working in this sector? If the Royal College has voted to end this mutual recognition of European degrees, the visits are going to be decoupled, aren't they, in terms of how we accredit our institutions across, say, Europe? What does that mean for the future of the profession?
If I might, I think there's three terms we've got to be clear upon. Harmonisation, which is things that sound good together, right? They're not the same necessarily, like a melody. Mutual recognition, which is very clear in how that would be interpreted, and then direct accreditation. So there may be other models out there, but I would suggest those are the three. I think as society evolves, there are different pressures in different parts of the world on different aspects of what our professional delivery is, and therefore standards do vary from time to time. And we had a period of relative stability where it wasn't so much mutual recognition, it was harmonisation, and therefore the visits could occur at the same time, and generally, not always, led to a similar conclusion of the visitors. Certainly from a school's point of view, it was useful having that coincident. I think as those standards start to drift apart, for whatever reason, good and bad, I suggest, it's difficult to then have the visitations at the same time, and it does take you to different streams. I think it is important that we, globally, because disease does not recognise political boundaries, it's good to have similar standards, and ideally in some critical areas identical standards would be helpful. That's not the case across the globe, but I know that our regulator, RCVS, has worked hard to try and maintain not only those relationships but also the standards, and it's got to come back to standards. If the standards are drifting in a way that is unacceptable to us, then there has to be an intervention, and it has to be different. But maybe we can actually work together to bring those more closely together again.
Thank you. Emily, yeah.
So the accreditation that RCVS use, which they've declared they're going to bring to an end within 5 years, they want to replace with direct accreditation of individual universities rather than going through a scheme. which is fine, but we're going to need to know more than less than 5 years away which universities we can go and target for recruitment. So ideally that accreditation would be happening in the next couple of years so that we can start building up that pipeline again for meat hygiene inspectors and for vets coming in. I think RCVS in their written submission to you said that they needed money to do that accreditation, and that was a gap. So I think there's a real issue there for us. The other thing that would make a big difference, just to draw the thread back, is what Malcolm was saying about the exam. So if you're not from an accredited university, you can do the exam. But if the exam is only running once a year and isn't modular and you have to do all them again and so on, that also becomes a challenge. So if we could solve that problem too, that would really help.
Thank you. We were talking earlier about vets and meat inspectors in the front line in abattoirs, and over the last couple of years we had a crisis in the pig sector where we potentially had a shortage of vets and meat inspectors, but also processors as well and specialist butchers as well. So we had the tragic situation of thousands of pigs being dammed back on farms because they weren't able to be slaughtered in slaughterhouses, and the awful scenario of pigs being slaughtered on farm and just killed. They were healthy pigs, and coming back to the mental health impacts of the people who have reared those animals and the people who had to then put them down as well. In terms of horizon scanning, are we sure something like that can't happen again and we would end up with animal health and welfare issues and mental health issues as well? Is that something that we are resilient to try and mitigate against?
There's, with both poultry and pigs, there is that potential issue where the turnover on farm is quite rapid. If you have backing up livestock on farm, then the animal welfare issues get quite serious quite quickly. If in the next year or two, we have got a number of risks on the horizon that could cause us not to have enough vets in abattoirs. So if, for instance, we can't afford to pay what the market is demanding us pay for vets or for meat hygiene inspectors, then we won't be able to recruit enough, and that will be a problem. Or if we're not able to get the Royal College accreditation in the way we need, that will be a problem. We're trying to mitigate all those risks with the work we're doing on we've already described. But if any of those things became true, then we're not going to have enough vets. So these are quite critical short-term issues.
That's the inspectors. What about also the specialist butchers as well and the processors? We were short of them as well, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, that's not so much my purview, and I think, Christy may have a view on some of that.
So I think it depends a lot on market forces as well, and how the cost and income balance ties up for the processing chain. Many of these, for pigs and poultry, are integrated chains. They are relying on export for parts of the pig that make little money in this country. So if we had African swine fever, for example, and we lose all trade to China, that has massive impact on the value of that overall pig, that business, and then downstream impacts, as we've heard.
We might get onto that later on, but some of these sort of global issues that could impact as well. Okay, we're going to move more back into education and over to Selene, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. Stuart, how well equipped are vet schools to meet the staffing and specialism needs we face at present, and what more could be done to support them?
So I think we're very fortunate to have good quality veterinary schools in this country. You won't hear me talking any of them down. And one of the issues I think that we have as we see the expansion in the number of schools is who is actually going to do the teaching and training that's required. Now, some of the accrediting bodies in the past have required that education to be provided by a specialist. I think that's softening across the globe. And we're now able to make use of employ people who are perhaps not specialists in their training in terms of discipline specialisation, obviously properly trained educators. So I think we're in a reasonable place at the moment. However, as I say, when you have expansion of the number of schools, obviously in North America, we've had 3 new ones in this country. I think that's going to come under some scrutiny in the very near future. And that is reflected in the number of applicants we would have for any one of our senior, particularly specialist clinical positions.
And what is the ratio of applicants to positions?
It will vary by school, but to be honest, sometimes we're fortunate if we get 2 qualified individuals for a specialism in the clinical area.
Thank you. Malcolm, was there anything you'd wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I would just like to touch on this diversity issue as well. I think that in the past we've seen all the vet schools delivering a similar model of veterinary education. Increasingly, there's a diversity of models of veterinary education, and we've got another new vet school in SRUC coming online next year who are going to push that further. This isn't just about diversity of education, though. It's diversity of the people that come into veterinary degrees. When we think about vets, we need some of the brightest, most academic people there are. We also need people who are happy to work in remote and rural practice, be part of that rural community, and want to be out carving a cow at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're different people from some of the most academic people who we're already selecting. So I would argue that widening participation is not just a good thing to have because we want individuals to be able to become vets. It's actually a real imperative for our profession to be thinking about doing that. And when we see I've had a vet student doing work experience with me who didn't have any A-levels. They looked at alternative pathways. So many of the vet schools have already got widening participation schemes. This is really important, and that diversity of models of education.
I'll just come back in on that one. One of the issues, and it takes us back almost full circle. Many of the educational models that have been promoted in recent years in different parts of the world, where there's been an attempt to attract people from less traditional backgrounds, more remote backgrounds into veterinary education, have not delivered what was intended. The people have not stayed. And it's actually how you then get a qualified individual to stay in that environment. And there are some good models emerging where loan forgiveness, supplementary payments and all manner of things is actually helping that to happen now. But people still will drift to where the remuneration is better and the working conditions are better. I'm not saying everybody, but certainly the models that have been set up previously have not delivered in the way that were intended.
Emily?
I think that the vets school offer is demonstrably not working for public health vets because we don't have the graduates coming into the profession. So, and just to as some examples, probably one of the better vet schools at doing public health training on the undergraduate degree is Bristol. And the FSA board visited Bristol Vet School in December last year and spoke to them about what they do. The vets are getting training every year on some of the theory. They get 1 week in an abattoir towards the end of their course. They might see 1 or 2 species being slaughtered, and that's it. Compare that to a Spanish training program where you might get 3 months public health veterinary training and all of that exposure in abattoirs and the chance to see that. So I think there's something about the design of the course that is different. There's then also a cultural issue about whether people are exposed to that potential career path and are interested in it. And again, our service delivery partner now attends all of the vet schools and the graduate fairs, trying to tempt people in. And just to give you some statistics from last year, in 2023, they took the detail of 433 people at each of those grad schools, and then they contacted them all post-event by their recruitment team, and not a single one wanted to apply to be an official vet. And I think that goes to some of the structural issues I described. So the graduate development programme, which RCVS require of you, the first couple of years you have some things to do. But I think there is that just must not be working if you've got all of those vet graduates not interested in applying to be into the public health official vet scheme after they finish.
Thank you. And Stuart, I'm going to come to you with another question if you want to bolt this bit on. The RCVS has reported 45% of leavers from the profession were practising for 4 years or less, as we've sort of touched on. Could vet schools themselves be doing more to encourage students to stay in the sector? And I know we've already had some suggestions in this, but is there anything you'd like to add on to prepare them for the realities of working as a vet?
Could we be doing more? We can always be doing more, but I would argue that, well, can I just take it back one step? One might argue that the public health industry is not matched to the qualities of our graduates, rather than, of course, not serving the needs of that particular sector of the profession. And I mean, paying people more, having working conditions that they want to subscribe to is a big part of that. And as I say, new graduates at the age of 18 who enter into the veterinary school, or whatever age they might be, do not generally come in wanting to work in public health. That's a reality. And actually, I don't know many people who go into their programs of study in any profession know exactly what they're going to be doing at the other end of it. So there is work to be done, absolutely. And I do invite you to visit the other schools as well, Emily, because I think there's quite a lot going on there. And those who have EAEV accreditation will meet the same standards as those Spanish schools. Could we be doing more to... sorry, back to your subsequent question, which I just have forgotten.
Was what more could we be doing within the actual schools to prepare people for the reality of being a vet?
Well, there's a very strong extramural studies programme that the RCVS have been very generous in their willingness to work with Vet Schools Council to try and make that a quality assured process for the students. There has been this kind of learn on the job, seeing practice is something of yesteryear, and now there's a much better, a much closer alignment with learning objectives, students in the working environment, and in absolutely to Emily's point, we want to see people seeing that extramural studies in all aspects of the professional working environment, including public health, all aspects.
Thank you. Emily, Malcolm, is there anything you'd like to add on that?
One common theme that we've seen in our media interviews today around the CMA review is the need to provide contextualised care for animals. That contextualised care is thinking about the owners and the circumstances of those animals. Vets, new grad vets, absolutely need to be equipped with that, not only to be able to look after people and animals, but for their own well-being in the profession. If they come out with high ideals that they're all going to, their role models are orthopaedic surgeons and medicine specialists rather than first opinion vets, I think they often feel a lot of guilt about not being able to deliver that level of care. So we need to ensure that they are prepared for it.
Thank you. And finally, what steps are the government and other stakeholders taking to encourage and support vets who have left the profession to return? And what more do you think could be done in that area?
I'll pick up first. So having data around this is really difficult because once you're not on the register, you're very difficult to contact to find out these things, and it's great to hear about exit interviews and things from that. I think a big feature is, so we need to understand more about why people are leaving. We see in government a lot about the flexibility of working and the actual job roles and what it is you're there to do, that it's not about necessarily ticking boxes and legislation, but I'll use an example. I've never used my vet brain so much since I have worked within government, not just as a chief vet, but work within government to make such a difference. But we don't sell it well enough, so there's a lot more we could do in that space on those points.
Thank you. Is there anything anyone else wanted to add?
Yes, this is a really big piece of work for British Veterinary Association, thinking about supporting return to work. We've produced a return to work toolkit recently. What we feel is that it's not about telling vets you need to do it, but showing them really good examples of where it does work well. And so that's something that we've been doing, and I think it's an imperative. A lot of our most experienced vets, if we can encourage them and support them to return, then that is key.
Thank you. Emily?
I just wanted to mention that last year, in 2023, we raised the pay for the vets who above our normal pay settlement by £3,000 a year for our operating vets inside the FSA, and our service delivery partner did the same, a little bit more per annum to there. So there has been a salary increase to try and make it more attractive. I don't think it's going to be enough going forward, and that goes back to my point about then either the Treasury or the meat industry being prepared to pay quite a bit more for this sort of service.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Selene. I think just coming back and backing up Stuart, what he said about the work that all the vet schools across the UK are doing in terms of veterinary public health and in exposing their students. There's some excellent work at the Royal Vet College. We as a committee saw firsthand when we visited Harper and Keele last week, they're developing a very strong veterinary public health programme. So there's some really good work being done in the veterinary education sector. Before I go on to Ian, I just wanted to come back to Stuart briefly. To sometimes the findings of our sort of sessions, it comes down to dollars and cents and pounds and pence, and we need more money to sort the situation. But Stuart, you touched on the concept of loan relief and debt relief for students. To actually train to be a veterinary student is an expensive undertaking for that student in terms of going to vet school for 5, potentially 6 years, 4, 5, 6 years, doing the extramural studies in your holidays, that side of things. So accruing a large debt. So that's one thing I wanted to ask you about debt relief if people go into certain sectors. But from your viewpoint as well, as the head of one of the biggest vet school in the country, it's not a cheap profession to teach either. It's a very expensive course. We saw that in Harper Adams and Harper and Keele, that these are practical vocational based trainings that are expensive to run with clinics and specialist staff. So can you just give us a feel for how much it costs to train a vet student, what you get in from the government in terms of a UK student coming in paying fees, and then what you have to do as well as a vet school to potentially take in international students who are paying a greater fee to actually allow your vet schools to function. Can you give us some feel for that? I know it's a bit of a big question, but...
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. It always comes down to the unit of resource, doesn't it? So since 1718, the tuition fee has been frozen, as you will know, in England and Wales, and teaching funding has only risen by 4%. If you go back to financial year 12-13, our costs, and I'm giving you Royal Veterinary College costs here, although I don't imagine they'll be that different, because I'll tell you why in just a second. Costs have gone up between 15 and 18%. And our funding has gone down, depending on how you choose to do your accountancy, by between 15 and 30, down by between 15 and 30%. So that gap is enormous. So we get in total in England and Wales, we get about £20,000, so the grant plus the tuition fee about £20,000 per student, and that figure was quoted by Times Higher from the Track T in 2013. As the most expensive course to deliver. There is no NHS, so all of the cost has to be borne, clinical cost has to be borne by the by the university or the university partners. In Scotland, it's even worse in Scotland. They only get 17,500, but yeah, that's tough. So if you look at audited costs as best as we have them, it's costing us per student somewhere between 27 and 32,000 pounds. We're getting 20. It's not a sustainable business. And if we come on to the split of international and home students later, you'll see why there might be a drift towards getting international accreditation. It's not that international students are displacing home students, it's that they're actually allowing us to take home students. If we take fewer students paying unregulated fees, I'll be clear about that, then we'll be taking fewer home students as well. So that's the harsh reality, and it will vary by school. Anything between 35 and 45,000 pounds will be the unregulated fee. I don't have the specifics for any one school other than my own. So you can see that there's a tricky balancing act to play here. We're fortunate, just to be clear, whilst I said it could be as low as 30% down in real-term funding, because we are regarded as internationally outstanding, I think is the word. We do get a specialist top-up grant from the Office for Students as a specialist institution. Other universities will not get that. They'll have to via it from their other courses.
So it's very much expensive for you to deliver the training, and then from the students coming in, you talked about the concept of loan relief as well. If they go into so the people are talking about that in the medical profession, in dentists and doctors, if they can work in the NHS for X number of years. Is that something that the veterinary profession should be looking at, to actually say, if you work in farm animal practice or veterinary public health, that will be something that we could support?
So if it's a 5-year programme and you're spending about £10,000 on your tuition and you're spending about £10,000 or more, depending on the part of the country, you're £20,000, that's £100,000. And I know there are student loans, but it's still debt, let's be clear. I think, I know the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, I'm a member there on the Education Committee, but not part of their of the council, but I know they've put in a written submission to you, and I think they've described very well the different types of debt relief, because there are many, and certainly in other parts of the world it's being used to fairly good effect. In my own area, for example, in education, if you make 120 payments, that would be like 10 years worth of contribution on your payments, and you've been working for, say, the public sector, the university sector, then your rest of your loans would be forgiven at that point. That's just one example. There are others, and I think you have that in a paper.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to come in on the finances at all before we go on to legislation now? Okay, so we're all champing at the bit now about reform of the Veterinary Surgeons Act, so teeing up Ian Byrne for some legislation now.
Thanks, Chair. I think he's all touched on it before, the need for the new legislation, but I'm just interested in common Christine, our outdated legislation is holding us back and it's preventing us from having a sustainable and world-leading veterinarian system within the UK. So you're not sitting on the fence there, which I like to see. So what could we do to improve the legislation? I'll ask you first, Christine.
Lots of things. One of the key things is, as I think we've touched on already, is this very prescriptive direction about who can do things to animals, which can be a vet, and we know that's heavily regulated and defined, or a farmer or a person in their employ. So it makes it really difficult in this space of veterinary technicians, we have veterinarians regulated, for other people to be part of that vet team and support. That, I think, is one of the critical things to address.
Would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think one of the most striking things at this moment in time is that a representative body like BVA and a regulator like the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, you could barely put a piece of paper between us in terms of what we think a new Veterinary Surgeons Act needs to look like. The Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons have got some legislative reform proposals which would make a perfect backbone for a new Veterinary Surgeons Act. It supports things like a really forward-looking fitness to practice. At the moment, it's very backward-looking and punitive. It supports the regulation of veterinary practices, which is such a talking point with the CMA review today. I think we do have to look at the unintended consequences. I think this needs to be a bill around a narrow scope, a Veterinary Services Act, rather than something that ends up being wider, but certainly a Veterinary Services Act rather than the Veterinary Surgeons Act to support that veterinary team.
And that work's being done on that. You've touched on potential draft legislation
Absolutely.
ready to go.
The Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons legislative reform proposals are very tightly defined.
Okay. Emily?
So there is a link between the official control regulations, which the EU created and which we follow, and the Veterinary Surgeons Act, because the official control regulations specify that a vet must do certain things. And if any meat business wants to export their meat to the EU, and most carcasses, the fifth quarter, will go to the EU, so the offal, etc., they need to follow the official control regulations piece. So we're not going to be able to influence the EU's rules because we're not part of the EU, but we can influence what a vet is in our own domestic legislation. And what we've got is too narrow. We do have vet-led teams, very good vet-led teams in abattoirs where the vet oversees the meat hygiene inspector. We've proved it works, and we think we could do even more. I gave the other example of environmental health officers at the port where the vet could do that. I think I'm impressed at how much work has happened to develop the proposed reforms in the Veterinary Surgeons Act. I think it's just a question of time, parliamentary time.
Thank you. Stuart, would you like to add anything?
It can't happen soon enough. If you look at where there's been massive change in regulation in other professions, it's usually because something bad has happened.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to do it before something
ahead
bad
of the curve.
happens.
Yeah. Really good point. Christine, what steps are you taking to develop the new Veterinary Surgeons Act, and have your proposals been received in any way by the current government?
So we have worked at policy level with the Royal College on their developing act, but in the meantime we work on statutory instruments to address where we can gaps, but we've been doing that for a long time and we're running out of road on that.
Yeah.
Whenever we have new ministers in discussion, present proposals for having a new veterinary surgeons or veterinary services bill.
Okay, so when do we? So that's ready to go now to have the debate on that legislation, how that work within this place. You're confident that it's there, yeah? Okay, well that's interesting. So, what short-term changes could the government make to support the profession while we wait for the benefits of these reforms? You touched on the SRs. Anything recommendations we could make within this area?
Well, we've heard about accreditation of vet schools and how that will work, and funding required to help that, to support the EU pipeline of vets. With it, I think there are things around debt relief to be explored. There's a lot that we can still think about.
I think there's two quite specific things. One is that the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons want to modernise the statutory membership examination. They have proposed a statutory instrument for that. It's an extraordinary situation where they themselves don't have the freedom to do that, but I think we should absolutely be supporting that. The other is that the British Cattle Veterinary Association has proposed to defer an exemption order for veterinary technicians to be able to support farm vets, particularly working in cattle practice, because at the moment somebody who's employed by a vet can't undertake the same procedures as a farmer can themselves. So it's quite a technical nuance, and an exemption order for veterinary technicians would go a long way to supporting farm vets.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you, Malcolm. So obviously we're in the middle of a general election year. Are these discussions getting had with all parties across the piece?
Absolutely. This is a really live piece of conversation for us across all the parties, talking about the importance for a new Veterinary Surgeons Act. We would love to see it on parties' manifestos for the next election. I hope that the CMA review may be the catalyst to achieve that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Malcolm. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. I wanted to come back on to biosecurity and that role and in terms of protecting our food supply chain as well. So firstly to Christine and Emily, we've touched on this a bit earlier, but can you articulate to people watching this, what role do veterinary surgeons and team vet play in safeguarding biosecurity in our food supply chain, and where do you feel this workforce is particularly under pressure as we speak now?
We play an absolute critical role in it in a whole range of ways. So our risk for biosecurity is diseases coming in. So we need to have import requirements, health certificates, checking of those, checking of animals that come in. Then we need to make sure that once animals, products are here, that the regulations around them are people are compliant with those. Then we have to have our vets in APHA, so supported by vets in practice through our contracted vets to carry out ongoing surveillance checks on animals, to respond to suspect notifiable disease outbreaks. And then you get into the food aspects, thinking about it for export, or for food going on our shelves and export of food. So there's the knowledge and expertise they bring, clinical skills, there's an understanding of the regulation and the processes, there's that assurance and verification as members of a profession who have to work to certain standards. That's a critical part of assuring the public and trade partners that the standards we said we would meet are met. And that's more within our public health sector. There's vets in practice looking after animal health and welfare of individual animals and farm level every day.
Really?
What she said. But also, so if you think about the sorts of things a vet is doing at a port, so they are overseeing physical checks. Again, it's set out in regulation what a vet must do. They are checking the certification that vets from abroad have done for export health certificates. If there's a rejected consignment, they're the ones that have to sign that off and do the rejecting. I think that this goes back to the question of the definition of a vet. You could have environmental health officers doing some of those things, but the thing about a vet is that they are a regulated profession, and that it's their independence in the certification process that is so important. They are personally accountable for that certificate. It's not just an institutional thing, it's them as a person, as a professional. And that, I think that's an incredibly important part of the safety and reliability and trust that we have in our food. And the same thing happens in abattoirs. We massively rely on that independent, professional, individual guarantee to food safety. And the UK's food standards benefit around the globe from that professional guarantee.
And that person is holistically trained in epidemiology, preclinical science and clinical medicine to be able to do a clinical examination as well. So
all those things, and they have to follow the professional body's expectations about certification and yeah.
Stuart, you wanted to come in?
I totally agree with Emily, and I think sometimes we forget that the most difficult job to do in the world is to be the general practitioner at coalface. I mean, they are the eyes and ears, whether you're in food animal practice, whether you're in inspection, whether you're in companion animal practice, whether it's picking up foot-and-mouth disease or potentially COVID in a cat, whatever it might be. They are the eyes and ears, and it is the most difficult job to remain observant and attuned at all times. And then when things do go wrong, we're pretty good at testing and tracing as well, just as a by-the-by.
Thank you. Back to you, Christine. I guess what are the things that keep you up at night in terms of biosecurity risks? And we've talked about, avian influenza, blue tongue, African swine fever, and then I guess lower level numbers, but things like Brucella canis coming into the country in dogs that potentially could be spread to people. What are the threats that you see as the chief vet that you are worried about that we need to be vigilant about?
So there's constant and ongoing challenge, both on our doorstep, African swine fever, for example. We're at medium risk of incursion overall, but at high risk of incursion through human-mediated ways, so people bringing in non-compliant products. We have vector-borne disease outbreaks on the continent on our doorstep, so we expect blue tongue again this summer and to be quite significant impact in terms of numbers. Epizootic hemorrhagic disease in France, sheep and goat pox as well. But we import from around the world. Yes, we do our due diligence and audit and things, but the chain is, and as we know, disease can spread. Healthy animals can start shedding disease. We move food quickly around the world, so you are also exposed to what is happening further away, disease. That's very much thinking about livestock, but companion animals as well. So you mentioned Brucella canis, and we see an increasing number of pets in the last few years who have come in that, with Brucella canis. From that, rabies is still present around the world. We have a strong regime, but we have rabies report cases every year, a number of dogs who show clinical signs that could be rabies and need to be investigated. Luckily, they haven't been, but we have to constantly, 24/7, be able to respond to those, and that is reliant on the clinical expertise of the vets going out to see these animals.
And so we're hanging on at the moment. Do we have the veterinary capacity if we are threatened by more of these diseases coming in? And we have spoken about the Animal and Plant Health Agency needing a complete refurbishment, and we're urging government to do that. And that's something that you would be keen for us to keep pushing on, would it?
Absolutely. So Weybridge Animal Plant Health Science and Testing main facility grew over a number of years, and really a number of disease outbreaks. Different departments were built as we responded to different diseases, and there has not been ongoing investment in the infrastructure. It is very tired now. And we are at risk currently of bits of it being taken out of service while they're repaired. And that's just for the disease situation we are now. If we look forward, and there was the recent medical report about the impact of climate change on human health, we need a facility and structure that is fit for purpose in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Malcolm, did you want to come in?
I think one of the great challenges is that whether it's avian influenza or blue tongue, we need to recognise that these diseases being around is part of our normal. We shouldn't see that as exceptional, and the impact that has on vets in private practice as well as government vets is significant. It has impacts on things like a delivery of TB programme, because if there's real pressures on government vets delivering that. So I think that is the challenge, is to have a workforce that is within the government vets that is able to deal with these diseases, because they're an inevitability.
You're an equine vet, and so on equine vets' radar there is exotic diseases like African horse sickness and West Nile virus that practitioners are being vigilant about. In heaven forbid that sometimes
this is normal veterinary work, that we have to be vigilant for diseases in whatever sector, and we need to recognise that that's normal veterinary work rather than exceptional.
Just coming back on to biosecurity and how we protect our borders. Now we've left the European Union, there is the opportunity to tighten up that biosecurity. We have more control of that, and part of that is the border target operating model, and we as a committee have been looking at that very closely. We went down to Dover a few months ago, and we've had ongoing discussions with the department on that. To what extent do you feel that target operating model is going to work, and how will it impact veterinary capacity moving forward? And are any recommendations that we as a committee could helpfully make to government to actually make it future-proof?
So I think once the full model is rolled out and implemented, then it will be a good and effective regime, because it's more focused on products, countries of higher risk as a risk basis to it, so more attention will be focused there, and less on products, for example, things we call composite products that are highly processed, will be less attention on those because they're much less likely to bring disease with us. We've gone through, so we have our controls for the rest of the world. We continue with what was the EU regime for those. We've implemented this new structure coming online for products coming from the EU. We now have export health certificates in place, and we'll be moving to having the border control post controls for things coming from the EU. And then we will change the rest of the world regime to align to this risk basis. It needs to be a flexible regime, and it will respond to as risk changes around the world, which is another thing that I really like about it. But it is key for me is having the resource. So you need to understand people that are compliant, that bring product in with their export health certificates and things, but we need to have a strong focus where there is non-compliance. So that's particularly a border force role for me, picking up people who are completely trying to avoid all of the import rules. So we know very small amounts of meat can carry African swine fever or foot and mouth disease with them, and we need to have a strong system across all agencies at the border to pick these up.
You hit on that point of non-compliance and I guess the unscrupulous people that are going to be trying to get round and avoid checks and use loopholes. And we've, as a committee, have been very concerned when we went to Dover, and there is the inland port in Sevington, 22 miles away, that people will be directed to. And we've been very keen to say, look, can we still have some random checks actually at the port, cognizant that they don't want to disrupt the flow through the port, but unscrupulous people trying to smuggle in suitcases or boxes full of pig meat that might potentially have African swine fever. My colleague and friend Selene is this week taking the puppy smuggling bill through Parliament, and you know, bad people trying to smuggle heavily pregnant dogs or puppies, if they're told to drive 22 miles up the road, what is to stop them potentially offloading their puppies before they get there? So these are some of the concerns we have biosecurity-wise, but also animal welfare-wise, and what can we do to really tighten up and close the loopholes?
So I'm not so worried about the 22 miles because it doesn't make a difference whether it's 22 miles or the 5 miles to Bastion Point. For me, it is about the cooperation of the organisations involved from coming into port all the way through to you're released into the UK market, and particularly around intelligence sharing amongst organisations, not working in their silos. Because what Border Force tell us is that you often find somebody that might be bringing in meat is also non-compliant in other areas. They want to bring in other things that would be illegal. And having that intelligence is really, really critical.
Can we still have some random checks actually at the port, not 22 miles away? That's what we...
Absolutely.
And that will be intelligence-led, and so that these people will know that this could be on weekends, it could be on bank holidays, it could be in the middle of the night, that they still will be checked. I guess that's what we want people to know, that the UK is trying to protect its borders from diseases and adverse animal welfare situations coming in.
And we've noted Dover, but of course we have a number of other ports and routes into the UK, and we need to be able to have a similar focus on all of them, and not be strong in one place and have back doors.
Now, Malcolm, something that your membership has been pushing for as well is pre-import checks of animals, and we've touched on Brucella canis. But can you tell us the impact of, I guess, the stresses and strains on practitioners in small animal practice who are very concerned if they've got a heavily pregnant dog that's maybe been imported from the continent of Europe, from Romania or Macedonia, that potentially could be whelping and exposing the team vet to Brucella canis, which is a not nice disease in people and a grim disease in dogs. I mean, you've been calling for that, and I guess what is the impact, and what does it mean for the veterinary sector to be actually to do those checks?
Absolutely, and if we wind back some time, when we had really robust rabies controls, that actually served as a control measure for a lot of other exotic diseases. And we are seeing several exotic diseases of dogs, particularly coming into the UK, as well as exotic parasites, ticks that can transmit zoonotic disease. Of those, Brucella canis, as you've alluded to, is the one that our members are most concerned about, not just for themselves, but for the owners. And that's where we've seen people getting infected, is owners of bitches who whelp who are infected with Brucella canis. So pre-import controls, it's much better to deal with these things before they come into the country than deal with them afterwards.
And then you've mentioned tick treatments, and that's, I think it was in 2014 the EU changed that sort of mandatory requirement to have tick treatment coming in. But is that something, Christine, that the UK could strengthen so that dogs coming in, there was the cases in Harlow in Essex where a dog picked up Babesia from a field in Harlow, but the dog had never been out of the country. So a tick obviously had been deposited in that area from a dog that had been out. So is that something that we could do? We can strengthen our borders by bringing in some of these checks, but also some of these preventative health treatments.
Yes, we have the ability to define our own, based on the risks that we're seeing, define our own import controls.
Okay, thank you. Before I get on to the final question on animal welfare, I just wanted to touch again on official veterinarians, and we've touched on sort of recruitment and retention. Are there any points, I guess, as take-home messages that we can do to improve that side of things? And I guess one thing I would ask, firstly to Emily, that the temporary registration system has been to try and help the shortage of official veterinarians and abattoirs. Will the FSA's next procurement exercise, could you actually expand that to allow more usage of the private sector and vets out in practice to actually be part of that rather than a central pool? Is that something that you are directly looking at? Because I think, is that something that we could do?
Yes, so we're at the moment we've done we need to let the contract by April 2025. That's when the existing contract runs out. So we're in the middle of engagement with the sector. We'll be going out to tender in the next couple of months, and then we'll be taking responses to that. We've been very clear in the design of the contract this time that we want to make sure that we're first and foremost is we protect consumer health and consumer safety, and we can provide a service to the meat industry that we need to do. But also we want to make sure that the supplier base is supported. If possible, we don't want to be in a monopoly situation. There are, of course, knock-on costs to that. So one of the financial risks that I'm handling at the moment is the financial risk we've already described around the meat hygiene inspector migrant salary cost, but also the potential risk of an increased cost to official controls, because once you have more than one supplier, there are additional, there's less economies of scale. It is nevertheless very important that we have a sufficiently diverse provision, and we'll be very interested. We're trying to encourage as best we can a diverse set of applicants for that tender so that we can have a more diverse supply.
If I could go over to you, Christine, I mean, you've I think in your submission to us, you've talked and you mentioned about our reliance when we have an emergency of the people in the front line, the private practitioners that stepped up in 2001 in the foot and mouth crisis. So is that something that the government would be supportive of, to actually see if we can mobilise that army so that we're in a peacetime situation, albeit you've said that we have significant threats, but heaven forbid we get a catastrophic disease outbreak? Is that something that engagement with private vets to become more of them to become official veterinarians, so that, you know, farm vet could actually then follow that herd into the abattoir and see the health status on the supply chain? Then is that something the government would get behind, do you think?
Well, we use private vets through our veterinary delivery partnership. We've used them hugely in the outbreaks that we've had in the last few years. So over 3,000 days a year for the avian influenza outbreak. I don't see them as a separate workforce. They're a critical part of the workforce that we have. But we're all pulling on the same, it's one workforce, and we're all pulling on the same people often. And that, as I said at the beginning, is in addition to the kind of day job where outbreaks, as Malcolm said, have almost become routinely part of them. So the call is really further stretching resource. But absolutely, we need to work together through the system from farm, I believe, through to fork.
Before I get on to the final questions on animal welfare, does anyone else want to say anything more about biosecurity or public health? Okay, over to Barry now.
Thank you, Chair. First question is a very easy one, and that is, isn't it great when we have a vet in the chair of the committee?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I want to focus on animal welfare. Where's our next Lincolnshire? You'll recall that a couple of years ago in Lincolnshire, there were, I think, only 8 vets operating in the county on farms, and there was a real question. In fact, I think the BBC did an expose showing that there was a real risk to animal welfare because farmers were having to do things that really vets should be there doing. So where are we exposed at the moment? Where are the hot spots that are of concern or should be of concern?
Well, I note my Scottish colleague Sheila Vos and the Highlands and Islands veterinary scheme, where Scottish Government has close involvement with practitioners there, because there's not the level of business and animal population to support having a lot of vets in the area, but the services required for animal health and welfare.
And given that is a devolved matter, and we are focused here on England, where are the hotspots in England?
I think
there is the shortage. I mean, Ms. Miles, you said, I think, when you were talking with the chair about the situation in abattoirs, you said when there's the shortage of veterinary professionals, animal welfare issues get quite serious quite quickly, I think were your words.
I was talking about backing up on farms for the animal welfare issues. In terms of vets and abattoirs, so vets on behalf of...
I wasn't wanting to focus simply on abattoirs, but please go on.
So what we find in terms of recruitment is that it's easier to recruit overseas vets to cities than it is to rural areas. So basically rural areas struggle more.
Yes.
I think we need to be not so much asking the question now as to looking over the horizon scanning over the next 5 or 10 years. And increasingly, if you're a new graduate vet, you can work in small animal practice and you don't have to cover any out of hours because that is becoming centrally resourced. You're likely to be able to work more flexibly. I think it is any area of remote and rural veterinary practice is where we would have concerns, and many of these measures that we've talked about, supporting vets with veterinary technicians, are important. But as soon as we do that and we start replacing vets with other people, we also reduce the number of people that can be on duty at night. So if you have a practice of 4 vets, that is more resilient to trying to provide that out-of-hours 24/7 cover. And I think we may have to have some challenging conversations about that requirement to provide 24/7 out-of-hours cover if we're going to be able to provide veterinary cover at all in some areas.
It's interesting that you and Ms. Miles have taken the question back to the issue of adequate cover and the human side of it. I'm trying to focus on the animal welfare side of it. And you say, well, let's look prospectively. Let's look to the future and see what we can do about it. Now, obviously, we know what we can do about it. We can get more vets trained up. We can get more vets into the country. We can pay them better, put simply. But that doesn't tell us what the problems are now. And what I'm asking you, and you're being very diplomatic and not wanting to sort of point the finger, I imagine, but I want to know what the impact is currently on the shortage of veterinary professionals, not just in rural areas, not just in the sort of pet and domestic animals, but in farm animals. in the whole package, where is the system creaking under the strain currently?
It's creaking under the strain, but vets are delivering it. So I'm not aware of anywhere where animal welfare is actually starting to suffer, but it's the veterinary profession that is creaking under the strain of delivering that. And that's I think, a concern. So in answer to your question, I don't have a sort of another Lincolnshire to look at, because vets...
Well, vets there were doing 70 hours a week, weren't they?
Yeah, vets are amazingly good at stepping up when it's needed, but that's unsustainable.
Yes, Reid.
I'm still struggling a little bit with your question, because I would argue that it's creaking right across the industry. I mean, we run a tertiary level referral hospital, and there are some services where you cannot get an appointment for months. So, I mean, whatever you might think of it, obviously emergencies are emergencies and they're seen on that basis. But, you know, animal welfare is being challenged by having, in the same way as human well-being is challenged by not being able to get appointments in a timely fashion. Now, that won't be ubiquitous, and that's at the tertiary level of referral. But it is symptomatic.
So, just to be clear, you believe that animal welfare is suffering across the board as a result of the lack of veterinary capacity?
Potentially, I'd say, but not ubiquitously.
We've now got the responsibility placed on vets to neuter bully XLs. Let's start at the other end. What is the carrying capacity of the average veterinary surgeon to overnight a dog after they've been neutered? How many places would they have available to do that? On average, yeah.
I don't think I can give you a figure, but I don't think that there's an issue with the capacity to do that. There's an issue with perhaps the capacity to do that in a specific practice. So a lot of out-of-hours care is outsourced to somewhere else. And so there's the capacity to do it. Many veterinary practices themselves will not do that themselves.
So, do we have any idea of how many bully XLs need to be neutered? Chief Veterinary Officer?
I think our current estimate is about 70% of those that have been registered so far will require to be neutered.
So in numbers, what would that be?
The latest figure I had for registrations, I'll put it a different way. We think there's an extra 0.13 additional dogs per practice per week to be neutered.
What are the latest figures for registered XL bullies?
I don't have them off the top of my head.
Maybe you could...
Because it's changing all the time. I hadn't...
Yes,
maybe write to us with that
yeah,
after.
Sure.
Yeah,
and of course there'll be a number that...
But the estimate is an extra 0.13 animals per practice per week. Of course, we recognise that it doesn't work like that because there'll be more in some places and less in others.
Indeed.
But that's an estimate.
Surely we have a snapshot of the number of registrations because the deadline has passed, though.
Yes, no, we'll have it. We had an update on Friday.
Okay,
I can't remember the specific figure.
We absolutely cannot just take the number of XL bullies and divide that by the number of practices and the number of weeks until the deadline, because these animals are not equally distributed, and vets are actively encouraging people to leave it to the last minute for the health and welfare of those dogs.
Well, because I was coming on to that, yes. But please keep going. 18 months. What do you want?
So the profession is encouraging people to look ahead, plan ahead, and book
Dr.
appointments.
Middlemiss is listening, but I think the department's got a different view, hasn't it?
But there's so much evidence about the negative health and welfare implications of neutering large breeds of dog too early. So owners of young dogs are being encouraged by vets to wait until those close to the deadline. So we've got less weeks. We've actually got, many vets veterinary practices don't have a lot of Excel bullies. Some have a significant number, and where that is particularly unequally distributed is charity practice. So what we're going to do is put a really heavy burden on charity practices in a really short space of time, and we would particularly like to see an extension to the neutering deadline to allow dogs to be 18 months old before they're neutered. That would both benefit animal welfare and veterinary capacity.
I think my colleague Ian Byrne and I are, as urban members of Parliament in our constituencies would feel that very acutely. But yes, Dr. Middlemiss, please give us the solution from government.
So we've heard the advice from BVA and from yourselves around looking at the age of neutering, and now we have the figures, which we know of the number we have registered and their age. It is being reviewed.
That's something that we as a committee have called for, and we've asked. Yeah. So it's under review, and it could be
under review.
Is it likely that you will reach a decision?
I don't have that. I'm not. I don't have that information today.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to come just quickly before we sort of wrap up. Talking about veterinary capacity around the country and in more sort of, I guess, rurally isolated areas. Stuart, you talked about your partnership between the Royal Veterinary College and Aberystwyth now. So hopefully part of that model will help a supply in rural Wales as well. Is that something that...
One would hope so.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen.
That's something that was very much as when you set that up. And you mentioned also SIUC in Aberdeen. That will hopefully have some help in capacity for Highlands and Islands as well.
Again, one would assume so. I mean, I pay tribute to Elizabeth Treasure, who was the VC at Aberystwyth, who had a real commitment to the local community and meaningful professions and jobs being created in that area. And she had a nursing programme. She introduced the veterinary collaboration with us, so yes.
Final quick question, covering an issue in terms of how veterinarians can operate across the United Kingdom. One of the issues, I know the BVA has been working very hard on this as well, and I've asked questions on this too, about the supply of veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland, that we've had a temporary dispensation so that they will be available until the end of 2025, but there was the situation before that extension that potentially 50% of veterinary medicines may not be available in Northern Ireland. That would include things like salmonella and leptospirosis vaccines as well. So it's not only for the health of animals and flocks, but also there's a public health aspect. I just wanted to ask the panel your thoughts on that in terms of what pressures we can make in terms of Europe and UK dialogue to actually get that over the line, because it is a common sense thing that will help the entire United Kingdom.
Conversations continue. We've given the extension of 3 years, as she said, and conversations continue with the EU Commission. What is really helpful now is getting additional data from the pharmaceutical companies on which particular products will be at risk, because we can then translate that onto the impact on the ground, and that's very important, rather than just a percentage figure of veterinary medicines won't be available, because we know we have generics and different things. So getting that data is extremely helpful, and conversations continue.
Thank you. And Malcolm, did you want to say anything on behalf of the BVA and the sister organisation in Northern Ireland as well as to what you would like to see?
We need conversations across the board. I know Christine spent a great deal of time looking at this as well. The solutions are going to be found within Europe as well as the UK. I think there are wider implications than just the supply of medicines into Northern Ireland. We need to see that the United Kingdom is a relatively small market for some of these manufacturers. Again, if we put friction in the way, we'll see less drugs coming into the UK, we'll see less innovation. It's really important to see Northern Ireland as a big part of that jigsaw.
We've talked about the UK and Christine, you've talked about the Chief Veterinary Officer for Scotland, Sheila, and you work very closely across the entire UK and with your counterparts in Europe. Is there some scope for a veterinary arrangement between the UK and the EU to help with this sort of combined protection of biosecurity on the continent of Europe and across the UK? Is that something that you can have dialogue with your counterparts in Europe with?
Yeah, I have ongoing conversations with chief veterinary officers, particularly at the moment for the Netherlands, for example, with Blue Tongue, understanding what they've been through. So absolutely, that sharing of intelligence continues and is really critical. particularly with the island of Ireland as well, and the CVO in the Republic.
Thank you. Right, we're going to come to an end now. I just wanted to just have a quick fire final sort of question to everyone, just a very quick wish list. This is, we won't be writing a formal report, but we'll be potentially writing to the department and writing letters, etc. So just 2 or 3 bullet points that you feel that we as a committee could raise on your behalf as to what issues you feel that we've talked about today, or things that you would like to see with the pressures that are facing the veterinary profession. So I think I started from left to right last time, so I'll start with Malcolm this time.
The first one is probably pretty clear, is reform of the Veterinary Surgeons Act, and then my other 2 bullet points are a statutory instrument for modernising of the statutory membership exam for overseas vets, and an exemption order for vet techs, which has already been proposed to DEFRA by the British Cattle Veterinary Association.
Okay. It's a bit like a round of countdown now. I see everyone writing down their 3 words now. Okay, so Emily.
Well, I just want to say a massive thank you to the committee for doing this hearing. In the Our Food 2022 report that we published in November last year, we said we were concerned about vets and vet supply, and it's just really helpful to have this opportunity to talk about it. So massive thank you to you. Vets are the backbone of, official vets are the backbone of work on animal health, animal welfare, public health for us. My wish list has got 4 things on it. So the first is financial investment in the system, which is about increased remuneration, support to universities, support to students. The second is RCVS getting support to do that accreditation for overseas veterinary qualifications. The third is the VSA reform piece that we've been talking about. And then the fourth is an exemption to meat hygiene inspectors for the salary cap.
Okay, thank you. Emily, so Christine, you're allowed 4 now.
It's good to have 1 on, I could have 5. You know, I agree on the Veterinary Surgeons Act. We need to update it, make it contemporary for now, but also future-looking. For me, unsurprisingly, continued investment in weighbridge is absolutely critical because a big exotic disease outbreak undermines everything that we're doing across the profession. I'd like to see recognition of professional pay within government, within the structures that we have in the civil service. We're bound by the department and wider structures as civil servants, and less recognition of professional pay. And absolutely this definition, which probably falls on the side of what is a vet, I think we need to look at, and then that leads into how we're educating the people that are going to be vets and then what they do.
Thank you. And finally, Stuart.
So, no surprises. The new Act, and with as much as possible being put into secondary legislation, because we can't afford to go another, whatever it is, 60, 70 years before we modernise the next one. I had the soapbox for 2 minutes on the unit of resource of veterinary education. I can't get away from that one because I don't think it is sustainable in its current form. Maybe a 10-year horizon, but unless that gets sorted, we'll be having fewer veterinary surgeons in this country, not more. And the final thing, and it's a missed opportunity on my part, is to see the term One Health appear in the official transcript, and I think I've just achieved that. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Well, on that point, that's a great way to end the concept of One Health, the role that Team Vet does to protect and uphold animal health and welfare, but also human and health and welfare. So can I thank all our 4 expert witnesses today, which has been a wide-ranging, thorough session, exploring lots of issues that's been very helpful to us as a committee, that we'll be able to feed this into the department and to our parliamentary colleagues as well, so that we can protect this sector moving forward. So thank you very much. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.